My name's Scott. Let's talk about the differences between groups and components. Geometry can be isolated and organized using groups and components, and on the surface they seem like the same thing. We're going to talk about a couple of differences and how we use them differently in different situations. So let's go ahead and start by drawing a house. We've got a house. Let's say it is 50 feet by 20 feet. And we're going to push-pull this surface 8 feet. There's this really cool roof tool from Valley Architects. That's VALI architects.com. It's a plugin you can buy, and you essentially grab the surface, you select make a roof, and then you've got a roof. It's pretty nifty. Since we're not designing roofs, we're designing landscapes, that's good enough for our purposes. I'll undo that, but for now we're going to just select, draw a line for the center here like we did before, space, select the line, M for move, select the endpoint, lock the axis, and let's just go 36. So let's say we've got a house here and we have some sort of landscaping that's happening in front of this house. A problem we can run into is that when we start drawing the yard and we want to make changes to the yard, let's go ahead and invert this face, reverse the face, then we can get in trouble because, as if you've noticed, and you grab a line, you hit M to move, the geometry is sticky. So everything sticks to itself. So the question is, how do we separate that geometry? And the way that we do that is both by components and by groups. So we're going to start by making the lawn its own group. So we're going to double click the lawn. We're going to right click and hit make group. And now you can see that there's a bounding box around the yard. Now when I select that group and I hit move, it's now separate from the house geometry. And if I want to edit this, I double click into the group. You see the dotted line. Everything that's not inside the group fades away, and now it acts like its individual geometry, lines, surfaces. I can edit it. I can select an edge, hit Q. I can rotate. So I can move the geometry around. But now it's its own group. And then the house, we're going to triple click because we want to select all of the remaining geometry. Notice that it did not select the yard. And so we're going to right click and we're going to make this a component. So we'll hit make component and we'll name this house. And we'll hit create. So now you see we've got a bounding box around the house. So on the surface, these two operate the same way. They've separated the geometry from itself. I can double click into the house and now I can edit it. Let's say the pitch isn't steep enough and I need to add another foot. Now the main difference in how these two act is that when we make copies, let's say I copy this over, select M for move, grab a point, option on Mac, command on PC, let's move it 80 feet. Now, when we make changes to groups, it's not reflected in the copy. But when we make changes to components, the changes are reflected in the copy. So, for example, if we go to the yard and let's say we need to change the corner of the hill. M to move, we'll grab the point, we'll hit the vertical axis, and let's say that hill it actually drops 24 inches in that corner. We hit space. So the yard kind of does this hill down there towards the corner. That change was not reflected in the front yard over here. But on the component side, let's say we come to the house and we say, oh, you know what? It's time to do the windows. So you draw some windows and you put a window in it. Now that change is reflected in all versions of that component. 80 feet, 2x. Let's say you've got 4 versions of the design. It could be really helpful because you can focus on the landscaping while the house looks like a white box, and then at the end you can come and make changes to the house, and that change will be reflected on all the house because you're not designing the house. That piece is consistent throughout the model. Things like columns will be consistent, posts for pavilions. These are all helpful components to create as components instead of groups. Things like the yard, it is better to group as a group because let's say this is the original grade, but since we're landscaping this 80 feet, and let's say we've got a patio, a raised patio here, and we need to change this one, we can now go in and edit this without affecting our original grade. And then finally, we can also right click and explode. And now we've essentially ungrouped. That's how to return the geometry back to not being in a group. The last thing about groups that I would recommend is I've created a shortcut to use the letter G for groups. So I can just quickly double click and hit G, and now that's a group. I use groups more than components, only because I tend to get in trouble. Like if boulders are a component, but then you've got to adjust the boulder, say a corner's too sharp, then you've changed the shape of that boulder for all the boulders in your model. Now that's groups and components. Now we want our model to work for us, and as you've seen with groups and components, it can make it easier to make edits later on. As you continue to use SketchUp, you'll find the methods that work best for you. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and happy sketching.